Ladies and gentlemen, this is Nate Cressby, host for Today and Forever, and welcome back to another episode of the Lawyers in the Making podcast, where it is my job to focus on the unique journeys to the law and law school of professionals in the legal field and law students. Let's talk about what we're doing today, because today we have another incredible guest. He is a University of South Florida graduate and currently works as the Chief Executive Officer of START LSAT. He's held past positions as a legal consultant and clerk at Spinks Law Firm and as a consumer loan officer at One Main Financial. Excited to have him on the podcast today, Mr. Alden Spratt. Welcome to the podcast. How are we doing today? Before going any further, I'd like to say a quick word about the sponsor of this podcast, Rhetoric. Back in episode 25, I had the privilege of having the CEO, Luke Yingling, on the podcast, and ever since that episode, fell in love with the product. Rhetoric takes user briefs and motions and compares them against the text of opinions written by judges to identify ways to tailor their arguments to better persuade the judges handling their cases. Rhetoric's focus on persuasion and helps users find new ways to improve their odds of success through more persuasive arguments. Know more, win more. I was able to see a demo of the product, and its cutting-edge technology and fascinating features make for a product I am proud to sponsor, and further shows the new digital era the field of law has been entering thus far on my journey doing this podcast. If you decide to book a demo, let them know Nate sent you. Be sure to check them out in the show notes below or at userhetoric.com. One word, userhetoric.com. Now, back to the show.
Doing great. Thanks, Nate. Thanks for having me out. I'm just excited to get going and dive into this.
So, Alden, before we get started, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm originally from Philadelphia. I'm a big Flyers and Eagles fan, as I was telling Nate earlier. So I played ice hockey all my life, and I graduated high school in Philadelphia, and then I decided to quit hockey and move to South Florida because I wanted to go to college in Florida, like many other high schoolers. And then when I got there, I realized they had a hockey team. And I was like, all right, well, I'm going to try out. So I tried out, made the team, and I ended up actually being the assistant captain as well as the president of the team. And through my journey there, I realized I wanted to go to law school because I took a job as a legal clerk while playing on the hockey team because I needed some money to live in college. To be completely honest, I needed money to go out with my friends and do things along those lines because I was an athlete in college and it's not cheap. So I did that, and I actually became really, really interested in the law, became interested in the rules of the law and how our society kind of intertwines with the law. It was really, really interesting for me. So I started to look into law school. My dad and my uncle are both lawyers and have been for 30, 40 years. So it was kind of a natural path. It was something I fought for many years when everyone was like, oh, you're going to be a lawyer. I was like, no, I'm not. I'm going to go into finance. So for a long time, I was like, I'm not going to be a lawyer. And then I finally realized it was exactly where I needed to be and what I wanted to do. So I took the LSAT in early 2024, and I was fortunate enough to score a perfect 180 on the LSAT, which was amazing for me. And so after that, I realized, all right, I'm kind of good at this. And maybe I had a good day, or maybe I am as good as I would like to believe. However, I kind of dove into my study patterns and how I studied and what I studied, because I studied for about 3 months and then I took it. And I jumped 17 points, I believe, in those 3 months from like a 163 diagnostic to a 180. And I realized like most of my studying was from, like I took the training techniques from hockey and sports and I moved it over into studying for the LSAT. So then I realized, why don't I help other people do this at an affordable cost rather than the crazy, expensive costs that some of these other courses, cost. They're super expensive. So I decided to start LSAT, which is a technology startup. And we basically offer affordable LSAT prep using the techniques and the study methods I use to kind of jump those 17, 18 points in 3 months.
I mean, that's just absolutely brilliant. And as you people out there listening can tell from the title, Alden is not yet in law school, but as we talk about on this podcast every single time, I'll say it for the millionth time. Eventually, I will get an official counter of how many times I've said this, but there's no straight path to law or law school. There's only your unique journey, and Alden certainly has one of the most unique journeys I've ever seen. And I'd love to get into everything to talk about here, especially start LSAT the way we just started. That you got a perfect 180. You don't hear that every day. No, you do not. I got a 151. That's terrible. You're blowing me out of the water here, Alden. I'm not jealous. Don't worry. I'm a little jealous, though, I have to say, because that is absolutely brilliant. But let's go through the whole journey. Let's go back to the beginning. Of course, you just graduated from the University of South Florida this past July. And what's so special about this episode is Alden just recently turned 21. I just recently turned 21. I've never had such a young person on this podcast because I'm such a young person. Usually I'm on here talking to these partners at these huge law firms who've been working for 20, 25 years, doing this their whole lives. They're veterans in the field, but now we got the young guys are here. The young guns are here to take over. So I love to hear that. Now, back in 2019, you were an intern at Compass, and I just love talking about things that you've done in your life. So talk about that experience. Why'd you go to Compass? Why'd you intern there? Did it have to do with the finance route you were looking to go on?
Yeah, so I've always actually been really interested in real estate. I was just one of those kids that would go onto Zillow and be like, "Oh, why is this house so expensive?" Or, "Oh, why is this so cheap?" So like natural path for me was, all right, I'm going to become a real estate investor. So I was, I don't know, I don't know how old I was when I was a Compass intern, but I couldn't have been more than 16. And I just got hooked up with one of my parents' friends who was a pretty high up in the Compass, structure. And I did that for 3 months, and I realized it wasn't what I wanted to do. It wasn't that it wasn't exciting, because it was, and it wasn't that I didn't like a lot of parts of it, because I did. It was just that there were a lot of parts that didn't really appeal to me, and I think those kind of overtook and overwhelmed the parts that I really did enjoy. And it wasn't as creative as I wanted it to be. You'll see through, as we talk about my journey more, I've been striving to find something that's intellectually challenging, but also creative and stimulating throughout my journey. And I've found a lot of the finance and the real estate investing sector to be lesser so for my brain. I'm sure for other people's brains, that is very creative and stimulating. But for mine, it was lesser so. It was more processes based, which is why I've kind of turned to the law now.
So in searching for this sort of intellectual stimulation was very, very interesting. One of the first times I ever heard that was Brian Ginsberg, all the way back on episode 3. That was like so many months, almost a year ago now, that I was talking to Brian, who is absolutely amazing. Can't recommend him more. He is a superstar lawyer, superstar litigator, appellate litigator. Guy is doing million dollar cases. He was working for the New York State at one point. Amazing person. But where is this sort of that intersection between the creative thinking and the intellectual stimulation? Where is that rooted from? I'm so interested. Where is that rooted in?
Yeah, honestly, I'm not too sure. My best guess for myself would be like I've had ADHD all my life, as many young boys do, and girls. I mean, but it's particularly prevalent in young men. So I've always had a hard time like sitting in the classroom for years. Like I would sit in the classroom. They even gave me a spinny chair one time. Like I would sit in the back of the class and I would spin around because I couldn't just focus. But then I would get out of school and I'd go play hockey, and I was great. I was focused. Like it was highly intense, highly creative, but it's also a very complex game. So it was very like, challenging, like intellectually. And that kind of intersection started. And I think I've been chasing something that's similar to that sport, but in the professional field for a long time.
I mean that's a wonderful view. I always view things as art forms, just like yourself. When you really get into things such as hockey, I'm very much into basketball, and so when you
Right.
play for a long enough time, you start to see the little intricacies, you start to see the little creative processes that go through, especially the best players, seeing the best of the best, like someone like Wayne Gretzky. I know, you probably know this story very well, but when he was younger, he would trace the puck all around and go all around because he's not looking where the puck is, he's looking where the puck is going. And
Exactly. Yeah.
that's also just wisdom beyond his years. in saying that, because it also has to apply with life, you always got to look to where the puck is going, not where the puck is currently. And you look into the future, but you can come very close to it. It's that contrarian question. I was just reading 0 to 1, so it's fresh in the head. I read the whole book yesterday, and that's all he talked about is very much looking to see where the puck was going. But continuing on in your journey, you still were looking towards the finance route. You were a consumer loan officer at One Main Financial. I actually know One Main Financial. They're a very large company. So how was that experience? And did it finally, take you away from the finance game? You thought, okay, maybe this isn't for me.
Yeah, so I was there between high school and college for just a gap semester. It was supposed to be a gap year, so I was going to be a consumer loan officer there for a full year. Fortunate enough to get a job there, and I just hated it, for lack of better words. It just, once again, I wasn't intellectually challenged and stimulated, and like I'm the type of person where if I am intellectually challenged or stimulated or I have a goal, like I can work hours, like I'll forget about everything else, I'll hyper focus, and I'm like fully into it. I can go like 10, 12 hours to the point where like people have to remind me to eat. Like it can get detrimental. But the point is, I can do that and I do enjoy the work when it comes that way. But on the flip side, if something's not interesting or I just am not passionate about it or I don't see a clear path of how like making that sacrifice can lead to something else, then I have a very hard time kind of putting my time into it because I feel, oh, I can make a different path for myself. So I was only there for 3 months when I realized, all right, I got to go to college now instead of wait a whole year. So I like applied and got into Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. It's basically in Orlando. And then I was there for a semester before transferring to USF because I realized there was no point in paying for a private college rather than a public university, especially in Florida, because the public universities are basically free.
I mean that listen, you're living my dream. I wish I decided to go to college in Florida originally, but I went the state school route. I had to stay within the SUNYs, and but I love this place. I love Albany. Of course, as I was saying before, it gets cold, makes me very sad, very, very sad, so sad. But it's all right. I get through it. I put on my winter jacket. I got nice winter jackets at least, so I look good when I'm walking around. But it's just cold. I'm like, oh my goodness. And then the sun doesn't come out. I can't get my morning sun. Oh my God, I start freaking out. But as you went on in your journey, you eventually came to the legal field. You were a legal consultant and clerk at Spinks Law Firm. You were there for a year. So how was that experience and how was that introduction to the law?
Yeah. So first year at USF, I had most of my tuition taken care of by scholarship, thankfully. However, I needed just a little bit of extra money to live life, play on the hockey team, go out with my friends, but also just to pay for some of my rent, things like that. So I looked for any job I could find, and the first one that came up was this legal internship at Spinks Law Firm. And this law firm is a sole proprietorship. It's a great guy who's the lawyer there, Ed Spinks. Can't recommend enough. But he did probate and he did like wills and trusts and things along those lines, which is a far cry from any type of law that I want to go into now. However, he was super empathetic to my goals and he was super supportive. So he allowed me to do things I might have not been able to do at other firms, where I was able to kind of have more responsibility and write up some of these forms and motions and things along those lines. And it was just it was super technical, it was super creative, and it was super what's the word, encompassing of a bunch of different avenues, I guess is the best way to say it, for lack of better terms. And I was able to kind of pull from different aspects to put something together. It was kind of like building Legos almost, which is something I loved as a child. I loved building Legos. My brother and my brother's very similar to the way I am intellectually. We would sit there and build Legos for hours. I mean, my parents' attic is filled with boxes and boxes of Legos. We joke it's like $20,000 worth of Legos in there. Like it's insane. And I felt the same like intellectual stimulation when I was putting together these forms and these motions, grabbing bits of research here, hear, what the client's saying over here, the law over here. And it was the first time I was like, wow, this is something like I really enjoy. I don't even feel like it's work. So I did that for a year. And then I was fortunate enough to actually become the president of the hockey team, the student side of the hockey team at USF. And I had to leave because I just simply didn't have enough time, because I was also taking 5 or 6 classes a semester to kind of speed up my college career.
Absolutely. So, and speaking of your college career now, it's fresh in the memory. You just
Yep.
finished up. Do you, I'm just gonna put it plainly like this. Are you not a fan of school as much as I am?
So that's an interesting question, because I think you have to break it down a little bit further. I am There's two things that I love doing. So I love learning things that I'm interested in. I'm more than happy to kind of sacrifice some things to learn about things I'm interested in. And I also do not mind at all doing things I'm really not interested in if it serves a greater purpose. However, I find it very challenging to focus, or to go to some of these classes, or engage as much as I would like to, when I feel that the teacher isn't as involved, when I feel like the material isn't as complex or relevant to what I'm doing. And it's something I struggled with in college, especially my first year. So I was taking 18 credit hours, so 6 classes per semester, and playing hockey and working. Um, and I mean, some of the classes were great, but other ones were like your general gen ed classes, and you're like, all right, I'm never gonna do this. Fortunately, I had some AP classes, so I didn't have to take the really boring ones. But I just kind of forced myself to try the best I could. It was just hard sometimes to be like, oh, I'm free. I'm in college. I could go play hockey, and I'm going to Miami, because we went all over Florida, right? So like we go to Miami on a Friday to play hockey. It's like, oh, I'm going to Miami on Friday. Like I don't want to be doing work when I'm in Miami. And I think that first year was kind of like a steep learning curve, like between independence, between like college, what I want to do and study, and what I don't want to do, and also the hockey team. I think like each experience like that sets you up for the future, because now I know when I do go to law school how I need to treat it and what I need to do, regardless if I'm particularly interested in that sector of law or not.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. It's very much a give and take sort of thing. You got to sacrifice a lot sometimes. Understandably as well, when you're looking to go to law school, you got to make sure you're getting the best grades you can.
Right.
You can not pay as much money as maybe some other people do. Of course, you had a 180 on your LSAT, so your GPA probably doesn't matter anymore. But it's always just an interesting perspective to get on people going to school. Of course, myself, I had to take a lot of gen eds. I had to take oceans one time, which was just absolutely brutal. I didn't even know what was going on. It was just, I was like, oh my God, it's at like 9 a.m. too. It was the worst. It was literally the worst. I'd be sitting in the back of the class, like falling asleep, because I'm like, this, and it was like an old guy too. Nothing against him. But he was just going on about like, trenches and stuff, and
Yeah.
tectonic plates. And I was like, oh, like I'm never gonna need any of this stuff for the rest of my life. I just need it simply for the credit, which is always the toughest part. But
Right.
you indeed were the president of the University of South Florida Ice Hockey Club. Now, how is it being the president? What sort of responsibilities did you have, and how did that sort of influence going forward, the things that you would eventually do, and even start LSAT? Like, how was being the
Right.
president really suit you for being able to now start your own endeavor, really rein in that entrepreneurial spirit?
Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit of background about just USF hockey as well before I dive into that. So USF hockey is a independent club in Florida hockey team. So what that means is, because of certain regulations, especially with like men's and women's hockey, a lot of schools can't be NCAA, because you need to have a established women's team for a certain amount of years and men's. So another reason, like all these Florida schools have hockey clubs, and most of the players are very, very good, but they don't have the women's teams, or they're just starting out the women's teams now. Like USF, we added it last year, things like that. So it's kind of in the early stages. But what it allows you to do is it allows students or players to have increased control and direction within the club. So you have to be voted in and everything along those lines, just like a normal club. However, you're running a full program. So you're running a team with, or two teams at USF I was running with over $100,000 budget. And you're making every decision under the book. You're scheduling ice time, you're scheduling games, all of these types of things. So it's funny because this is actually what I'm talking about in my personal statement as well for law school, because this is a very, very transformative time for me. Once I was voted in as the president, I realized I had a lot of pressure that I didn't realize would come with the job right away. So there's two teams of about 30 people apiece, but the USF Hockey Club is actually very, very big in Tampa. So we get like 1,000 to 2,000 people per game. We have like 18,000 combined on social medias. Like we have a ton of stuff going on. So a lot of pressure. And the year before it had been good on the ice, but off the ice had been a little hectic for no one's fault, just simply because the last few years, when you have something come up each year, it kind of downgrades the club. So what we did is we brought a new tournament to Tampa Bay, which was hosted at our rink. And my biggest kind of feat while I was in this role was to introduce two new jerseys for the club, because we felt that the team's morale as well as the fans' morale was slowly starting to subside a little bit. So we thought, all right, we can give our players new custom jerseys. We can give fans the opportunity to buy these jerseys. And then we'll bring a new tournament to unveil these jerseys. So we went along, and I was voted in, I would say April of 2023. And we had tryouts and everything that summer. We went through all of that. We had the team set by September, and then we started designing these jerseys. The hard part was, because we are independent and not NCAA, we had to go through a ton of licensing. So I actually used a lot of my expertise and, I guess, experience from Spinks Law Firm to navigate this licensing that was both within the club, with the school and the club, and then just federal and state local regulations, which was a great experience. And I was like, oh, I actually I'm using the law. This is like real life. It's not just me sitting at a desk in an internship. I'm directing my club through this experience. And we finally got approval not only to make them, but we got approval to sell them, which is the first time in USF history we'd been able to sell the jerseys. Wow. Which was an awesome source of revenue as well. And the jerseys blew up. So they actually were featured on Bar Down Hockey, which is TSN Hockey, and FanDuel. So they did posts and articles about them. It's funny because one day I walked out of practice and people were showing me their phones right after I'd gotten off the ice. And I was there. I was posted on FanDuel and Bar Down, myself and a few of my buddies modeling our jerseys with on a national stage. It's holy shit, I'm out there. I'm on. It was just an incredible moment, but it brought in revenue because they sold like crazy. We sold over $20,000 worth of jerseys. Wow. That year, which was phenomenal, and it padded our budget. And I also learned how to collaborate with all these types of people, because I had a board of 12, so myself and 11 other people between the two teams. And then we had coaching staff for both of these, and then I had to work with rinks, commissioners, all that kind of stuff. So what it did was it allowed me to really understand everything that goes into something that looks so simple and easy from the outside, right? And what it further, promoted, I guess, or showed me is that there's a lot of legal aspects to anything you do. I heard this quote one time, and I don't remember exactly who, but it was basically said, oh, it's actually Jerry Seinfeld. I was watching Seinfeld, and he said this, and I thought it resonated with me. And it was that lawyers are like the people that read the inside of the box in a board game. Everyone else is kind of just going through life. the lawyers take the time, read the inside of the box, and they know how to operate. And I realized that's exactly who I am. I took the time to learn all these regulations so I could lead my team and lead these promotions to a much better standing than we had been in before. And it kind of fueled that, like, oh, if I can learn the law and I can learn how to do these things, I can promote whatever type of businesses or whatever type of mission I want to.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
I mean, it is the cliche sort of, when I've heard many times law students have told me, people who went to law school, that the first thing you get to law school, the first thing they tell you, they'll put like, I know, one of the law students had told me in their first class ever, the teacher, the professor had put like a picture of an airplane on the screen, and they're like, what is this? And they went through it. It's like, oh, there's all these regulations. You have to go through, the aviation people, TSA, all this stuff, make sure the security is right. And it's just telling the story of the law is all around us at all times, at
Right.
every moment of the day. It is just constantly, constantly. And when you go to law school, when you experience that, when you have an experience like yours at the ice hockey team, getting those regulations done, getting those jerseys, selling $20,000 worth of jerseys, you truly realize, oh my gosh, like the law is ingrained into everything that we do. And it's so important that we understand it. It's so important that we have lawyers in this world, good lawyers in this world, that can understand it at such a deep level. And the fact that you're understanding it at the age that you are, in the position that you're in, is just absolutely spectacular. I mean, I am absolutely shocked over here because I didn't expect any of this. I did a little bit, but now I'm shook. It's amazing. But and running that sort of thing, and running that sort of high intensity environment, what sort of things did you ensure yourself that you were organized, that everyone was organized, that everyone knew what they needed to do? Like, did you use any apps? Did you use anything like that? Did you have a calendar? Did you use like post-it notes? I love my post-it notes.
Yeah. So my biggest struggle in life is communicating to people that I have to lead exactly what's happening until it's already happened. So for the first, if that makes any sense, for the first few months, I was especially bad at this because I keep everything in my head, and it's horrible. I know I shouldn't do it, but I keep, events in my head. I keep what I need to do in my head. All this. I've recently tried to do a to-do list on my phone, and after day 3, it just ended up being laid by the wayside. So I realized I needed to kind of communicate because I had a bunch of other people that would be there to help me. Asking for help has always been my downfall. I don't like doing it, but I should do it, and I learned that I needed to do it more. So over time, we made these group chats. We used GroupMe for the communication because I was also a player on the team at the same time. So I was playing on this high intensity team where we, play 35 games a season, where we're traveling all over, and I'm trying to run this. So definitely just the apps and the enhanced communication was the biggest thing for me. I don't know if there was specifically like, a calendar or post-it notes like you have, but it was more so just realizing that I need to communicate. And once I was able to do that after a few months, especially rely on like my vice presidents, because I had 2 vice presidents under me, one of travel and one of game day operations. It made my life like astronomically easier. And one of them now is actually the president of the team when I left, which was great because I was able to teach him everything I know. And now he's doing a phenomenal job in building off the success we had last year.
Yeah, that's one of those things as well. I couldn't agree more with that, is asking for help. I am more often than not never asking for help. I truly believe in my heart of hearts I can do absolutely everything. I just, have to put my mind to it, sort of thing. But eventually you realize, all right, I got to delegate some responsibilities. I can't do absolutely everything because after a while, you're sitting there for 12 hours, and you've moved a half inch, and we're like, oh my goodness, like maybe I can't do everything myself. But you, as of right now, I'd love to see this. You're a litigation paralegal in training at Morgan and Morgan. Of course, they're always on my TV, always
Yeah,
on my podcast. They're absolutely everywhere. I'd love to speak to whoever works there at Morgan and Morgan because I hear them all the time on my favorite podcast. Like I said, on TV, they're absolutely everywhere. So, how has that experience been so far? You're still there to this day. So, how has
yeah.
that experience been so far? And how is it working at Morgan and Morgan, such a prestigious law firm, one of the biggest in the world?
Yeah, Morgan and Morgan is awesome. So, um, I actually got the job through connections while playing hockey. Someone approached me while I was playing hockey down there because it's a huge USF hockey is pretty big in Florida, and so is Morgan and Morgan. That's where it was founded. And I'm in Philadelphia right now, so I moved back to Philadelphia. And I'm a litigation paralegal. I was in training. I have to update my LinkedIn. I was promoted or I finished the in training portion a few weeks ago. So now I'm litigation paralegal. And I took the job because originally I did want to go into litigation. Like that was my goal. I wanted to be in motion practice. I wanted to do all these types of things. And it's been a really, really good experience because the lawyer I'm working for has been allowing me to write motions and write briefs and do a lot of these types of things that I normally wouldn't be able to do as a paralegal. So, for example, I get to work on motion for summary judgments or opposition to motion for summary judgments, and I get to form real arguments. I've learned so much in the past, month, 2 months since I started doing this stuff. How to use Westlaw, how to use the AI within it, how to kind of form a standard brief of facts and standard of review and argument and all of these types of things. And I really, really enjoy it. However, I also realized while I've been there that litigation is not exactly what I want to do because I do miss some of the numbers and analysis that come with finance. So I didn't touch on it earlier, but my subject, I guess, for lack of better words, in school has always been math. So I took calculus and like AP calculus as a freshman in high school, and then I took like AB or like the second part of that
Yeah, yeah.
calculus 2 in 10th grade. And it's funny because my brother did the same thing, except he went and did multivariable as a junior. So, but the point is, I loved it. I loved math. It just makes sense. It's like pulling from all these different avenues, putting it together, and you get an answer. And so I realized that my current track and where I currently want to go is into M&A work, but specifically within investment and private equity, because I get to do a lot of this negotiation, contracts, things along those lines, as well as pull from the analysis side and work with numbers. Um, but at Morgan & Morgan, I just get to practice and hone my skills before law school, which is exactly what I was looking for.
I mean, that is just absolutely amazing because something I always talk to people on this podcast all the time, people who went through law school, is finding out what they don't want to do with the law, but especially finding out what they do want to do with the law, but especially finding out what they don't want to do with the law. And you have already figured that out for yourself so early on before you even get to law school. I mean, my God, Alden, you're gonna be one of the best lawyers I've ever seen in my life, for Christ's sake, because you're ready to go already. The fact that you love math so much, I absolutely hate math. So see, that's the contrast there, because oh my God, I'm terrible, absolutely terrible in math. I don't understand any of it. It never made any sense to me. And it's just, there's so much going on. I'm like, oh my God, I can't take it. I'd rather read a philosophy book. I find it more interesting. It's very similar because we're all making, arguments, and math is very much making an argument and then proving that argument,
Right.
doing it with numbers and doing it with equations and all that stuff. But that stuff just went over my head every single time. But the fact, I mean, taking AB calculus in sophomore year of high school, look, there's probably like 10 people in your class, right?
Yeah, no, so I took AB freshman and then BC sophomore. But yeah, so I was the only freshman, or actually, it's a funny story. I had one other freshman in my class who was one of my good friends and who had played hockey with me for years. So we had both played hockey, grew up together. We were kind of, we would compete against each other in and out of the classroom. And we were in a class, there's like 25 different people in high school with like all juniors and seniors. And it was the scariest thing walking in there. And our professor would, not unlike law school, would cold call on you. And it was the scariest thing too. I was 14, maybe, I think I was 14 years old, like maybe 15, just 15. And you have a bunch of 18-year-olds who are like, that period is very transformative for a man, like in that period. So you transform like physically a lot. So these are 6 foot tall guys with deep voices. And I'm there like, I don't know how tall I was. I was like 5'4", 5'5", with like a voice that was very, very high and being called on to talk about these advanced derivatives. And It was a scary experience, but I think it kind of made me a lot more confident in my abilities, which has promoted me and helped me move a lot further than I would have otherwise.
I mean, of course. And speaking of confidence and abilities, you have such a great initiative. I love it so much. I love this so much. You are the Chief Executive Officer at Start LSAT. You started in May of 2024. So can you tell the origin story? Where did Start LSAT come from? Where is it right now? And where do you see it going in the future?
Yeah, so I will start off with my LSAT journey in general. So I started studying around February of 2024 for Start LSAT, or no, for LSAT, I'm sorry, just for the test. And I studied for about 3 months, I think, 3 or 4 months, give or take. And at the beginning, I studied like an hour a day, maybe, whatever it may be. And then I started out at like a 160 or 163 diagnostic. And I was like, oh, I want to go to a T14 school. But my GPA, because I had taken things, I did undergrad in 2.5 years. So I did so many credit hours. And I played hockey. My GPA wasn't as high as I would have liked it to guarantee I would get into a T14. So I was like, all right, I need to crush the LSAT. And I started working an hour a day, whatever it may be. And then a lawyer, one of my dad's friends, told me, like, who is very well known and he's very knowledgeable about the LSAT. He told me, look, like, you could get a perfect score. Like, you have the abilities, just study. And I don't know if he was just saying that to help me or if he was being honest, but like that lit a fire inside me. So I would study for 3-4 hours a day. Like I always tell people, it's something I tell my students to start LSAT, like get up in the morning, there's no distractions, and do an hour or two of LSAT. I would do that and you're like fresh and you can really get it going. And then in the afternoons, you can review theory and you can do a little bit more of practice. And I did that every single day on and off until while I was in Florida, until I moved up here in May to work at Morgan & Morgan. And while I was working at Morgan & Morgan, I was still studying. I would just get up at like 4:45 a.m. and I would study for like 2 hours. And then I'd go to work, come back, study more. And then I took the LSAT in June, which I know pretty recently. And I had a good day, like I like to say. And the waiting was the hardest part for that score because they haven't clarified this or solidified it, and I think it's my theory, and I think it's pretty common. But I got a score hold, which means they don't give you your score right away. You have to wait, and they say because of something that happened during your test. And everyone who got that score hold on the same day got a 180, but no one knew until we all got our score released. So for an extra 2.5 weeks after when the score was supposed to come out, I was waiting for my score every single day. They didn't tell us when it would come out, what time, whatever it may be. So those 2.5 weeks were hell for me. So during those 2.5 weeks, I realized I needed to do something else. And I already had a thought like, hey, if I do well, maybe I could tutor people, which is where Start LSAT originally originated from, even before I took the LSAT. But those 2.5 weeks, I was like, wow, I really need to like do something else. I need to get my mind off it. Work isn't enough. So I came home and I started building these videos that taught the LSAT. And they're animated videos that I've written the script of and produced that teach all these little intricacies of the LSAT in like a fun, easy, engaging way. Because I just believe my personal like philosophy is the LSAT is far too like overcomplicated. Like like people go into formal logic to teach it. People go into like these crazy plans to teach it. I just don't think there's any need. I think simplifying it makes it easier. Like that's just why people simplify things. It makes things easier and allows you to do better on the LSAT. So I started building these videos, and when I got my score back, I was like, all right, well, now I definitely can teach this. And it kind of originated from there. So I built this course out, and I also started offering one-on-one tutoring, and we've been open for about like a month and a half officially doing the tutoring and the course, and it's going extremely well. We've partnered with three colleges, I believe: Rollins College, Drexel University, and the University of South Florida. And then we've also partnered with Morgan & Morgan because I work there, and they've been really supportive. I actually have a LSAT prep page under their benefits for employees, which is pretty awesome. It was just random. One day I was just sitting there, and all of a sudden I'm talking to the chief information officer of the whole company about it. Pretty crazy thing to happen. But we're branching out, and our marketing technique and our thought is, because our whole goal is to make LSAT affordable. Like the course is only $110, and which is crazy cheap for LSAT prep and what we offer. And we do 10% student discounts at all our partnered institutions. So we've been reaching out to all of these educational institutions to try to spread the word that we're here to help. We're here to guide them. And if anyone ever needs anything, they can reach out to me personally. My email's on the website. And it's just kind of taken off, and it's been going really, really well. I'm running a LSAT 101 webinar at USF, and I'm going to try to start doing those at other schools as well. So, yeah, that's kind of the journey and where I am right now.
So I have to ask, because easily, you could have worked at the plethora of LSAT prep courses that are out there. I chose Kaplan, which was like so much money. It was absolutely crazy.
Right. Yeah.
I think it was almost like $1,000, which is just like, that's insane. So you're almost cutting the cost by almost 90% you're cutting the cost here. So first of all, that's an amazing thing. You're getting people on that. You're giving them that deal in terms of marketing, in terms of selling that to people. It's like, okay, it's only $110. That's very, very cheap. But you could have went to Kaplan. You could have been a tutor there. There's so many different places you could have been a tutor. So why did you decide to go out, do it on your own, hang your own shingle, and do it? Is it just because of the belief you have in yourself? Was it because you got the 180? Like, where did that come from to be like, I'm going to do it on my own? Screw those other people.
I just think, honestly, that's a great question. And I never thought about going and being a tutor anywhere else. I was fresh off being the president of the hockey team. I was fresh off like studying and willing myself every single night and every single morning to study and do well in the LSAT. And I was just like, all right, now I'm going to will myself to help other people. And I've always had this like fundamental need or want, both, I guess, to help people. That's why I wanted to be the president of the hockey team and help turn the club around, things along those lines. And I mean, I just kind of wanted to work for myself off hours of working for someone else. I work for someone else at Morgan & Morgan. I'd love to work for myself here. So there's that. And then my family business. So my grandfather, he came from very little, and he worked super hard. He went to Brown, did great. He became like a president of banking at, I don't know the name exactly, so I don't want to mess it up, but he did really well. And then he started his own company so that he could go to my father's and his sisters, like sports games, and be in their lives. And it's just really inspirational that he started. So I remember this story my grandmother tells us where he bought a fax machine. That was his first purchase for his company. And my grandmother freaked out. She's like, oh, it's like $400. We're never going to make it back, whatever. And I think it's been 30 years now. 30 years later, they have like 150 people employed with them. Like, it's a
Law
crazy
students,
company.
are you feeling
and
overwhelmed,
it
stressed,
just
or
inspired
short
me.
on
If
time in
he
law
can
school?
do it, I can
Maybe
do
you
it.
just want
I can
someone
make
to
my
show
own
you a
hours. I can make my
step-by-step
own
framework to
tutoring. I
master
can
the
help
topics you're
people
learning in your
at
classes.
an affordable cost.
I know the
I have
pressure
no
you're
costs.
under, and I've got the perfect
Right?
solution
I
for you.
have no costs.
My course,
Maybe
the Law School
$100 a month
Operating
for my
System, is
website and
proven to
my
help you
Google
conquer law
email
school
platform.
with
Besides
confidence
that, I
and
really have no
ease.
costs.
Created by
I don't have to
Lisa
pay
Blassett,
a
a former
LSAT tutor
guest on
because
the
I am an LSAT
podcast and
tutor.
founder of the
I don't
Law
have to pay
School
an
Success
animator or a website
Institute.
maker because
This
I
course
just
breaks
learned it
down
myself.
every subject
I would
into
just spend nights
manageable
and
main
mornings looking up
topics
YouTube
that you
videos to
run through
learn
a
how to do that.
comprehensive study
I even
system
taught
to
myself how to
thoroughly
code
prepare
like
you
some
for
things
class
because
and
I had to
final exams.
input
No
APIs
more
into my
feeling like you
system.
need to know
I had to get
everything all
licensed
at
with
once
LSAT,
in the
so we're
beginning.
officially
But that's
licensed
not
with
all,
like
Nate.
the
The Law
LSAT
School
like
Operating
administrators,
System
and that
also
was
teaches you how to schedule your
regulatory
studying
work
and
and
time effectively. For
trademark
every
work, and it was
topic,
just a
you'll
bunch
know
of
which
different
study
avenues
step
that I
you're
was
on
super
and when you'll
interested in,
complete it
and
every week
pulling
of your
things together
semester.
just like the
No more
Legos,
mad dash
just like the
cram
motions, just
sessions,
like the
more
briefs.
time
That's
with
what
your
I was
loved
doing with
ones.
this company
And
too.
with my system, you'll
And it's
walk
just
into your
been going
exams
really
knowing
well.
you've given 100% of yourself, that there's nothing more you could have done to succeed, and there's no better confidence than that.
Lisa breaks it down like this. One class, one list of main topics, and one system to master each topic. With recorded and live sessions for students available on her website and partnerships with law schools nationwide, the Law School Operating System is here to help you thrive from day one to the final exam. Ready to take control of your law school journey and operate at your full potential in law school? Visit www.lisablassers.com today and enroll in the Law School Operating System. Be sure to use code LSOSNATE10 at checkout for 10% off the recorded course. That is code LSOSNATE10 at checkout. Now, back to the show. I mean, that is just, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. I love it more than anything. I love the YouTube videos because I did it myself. I had no idea how to run a podcast. I had no idea what I was doing. I talk about it all the time. And I just went on to YouTube. I literally, the first time I was exploring, I'm really going to do this. I'm really committing to it. I just looked up how to start a podcast, put it into the Google search bar, and I got all these results. I did some research for some hours, and this is what came about it. And of course, as time went on, you learn some things as you go.
Right.
You make some mistakes. There's always some pitfalls, but having that initiative, I mean, the internet is such a beautiful thing. There is so much information. There's actually more than enough information for you to pretty much do absolutely anything. And there has been no other time in the history of the world that there is so much information out there that you could pretty much teach yourself to do absolutely everything.
Right.
Just like yourself. I mean, I taught myself how to do graphic design. I had no idea anything about it, but I just bought a Canvas subscription. I watched a couple of YouTube videos and I became pretty good at it. And, it seems it is, there are a lot of hours you got to put into it, of course. I wouldn't want to come out and say like, oh, it's all easy, it's all butterflies and rainbows, and we have a fun time here. Of course we have a fun time here, but you got to put in the hours. You got to. It's hard. It's one of my favorite books. The hard thing about hard things. That's one of the things he talks about. Is say, hey, listen, you know what? Sometimes you don't know an answer to a question. You don't know how to do something, and you just got to go out, have that initiative, take that step, and do it. And that's exactly what you're doing here. So I love to see that. But Alden, we're down to our last 5 questions. The first of the 5 questions is something I've seen throughout my entire journey doing this podcast, that the law is moving in a certain direction. Just like you talked about before in your time at your legal internships, you're using the Westlaw AI, using the LexisNexis AI. There's all these new technologies, all these new softwares. So this is sort of the tech stack question per se. Of course, you haven't been to the law school experience, but you've had your time at legal internships, and also you have your own company. So what does your tech stack look like? Even if it doesn't look like anything, any technologies that you use that you would suggest to people that help you throughout your day and make you more efficient as a person, as a worker?
Yeah. So ChatGPT, I love ChatGPT. I don't write with it, unlike other people, but I love to bounce ideas off ChatGPT. And I love to see, because it can give you some extra scope to your ideas, which I think is really, really important. Especially for me when I'm starting my own company. Like, I now am hiring, so I'm hiring a few interns right now from USF and Morgan & Morgan, which is great because they're going to help me with some of this marketing stuff, because that is my weak point, the marketing. I'm very business driven, but the marketing is it's just not what I'm good at. And I'm attempting to be, but I do need some help. But the point is, when I was alone and when I didn't have any of these interns, I didn't have anyone really to bounce ideas off of that could give me, that had any experience in these fields, right? I didn't have someone I could go to and be like, oh, you're a marketing expert. Oh, you're this expert or that. So I would use ChatGPT and I would bounce ideas off it, and it would give me some scope and some other ideas that I could pursue. So I use that a ton. And I also use it at work, not to write again, but to bounce ideas and see where that argument avenue could go. And then for research, when I'm doing case law research at work, I love the Westlaw AI. You have to kind of learn how to use it. It's a little bit of a learning curve, because if you give it too advanced a prompt, it may kind of just spin off and it might not give you the exact data or the exact case law you need. But when you learn to use it, it becomes super, super helpful. And just like the other day, I found the perfect case law that I never would have found in a million years just looking through looking through books or reading the whole opinion on every single one of these. I was able to get it summarized and find it. So those two AI features are just huge for me. And then for technology that's not like AI, I use Learn Worlds for my website, which is I've found a great tool to kind of build a website, run my course, and run my one-on-one tutoring. But I definitely think that as more technology comes out in the future, like we're just gonna have to keep up, especially you and I, as we're so young. Like it's gonna transform by the time, lawyers are, 24, 25, 26. So as we kind of just keep up and keep learning how to use the relevant technology, I think more things will kind of stem up that will be really like impactful and powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I always use ChatGPT. It is my best friend. I've been using it for a very, very long time. I know about ChatGPT from in high school, all the way back in high school. So almost 4 years ago, 5 years ago, that I've been using ChatGPT. And just like yourself, love bouncing ideas off of it. Of course, it is a tool at the end of the day, but when you can harness that tool, it is just so, so powerful.
Right.
And it just gives you, like you said, a different perspective on things, someone to bounce ideas off of, especially, how quick it is. Because if you talk to a human person, you're bouncing ideas, okay, they might think about it, they might come back to you. But ChatGPT, you get the answers right there. You don't have to go anywhere. It's just right on your computer, and it will, build it out in seconds. And you have
Right.
these ideas. And maybe they all suck. Okay, so give me five more. And it just goes on and on and on. And so I just think it's a wonderful tool. And of course, like you said, as time goes on, it will only get better and better. It will only improve and become such a valuable tool. So, I mean, for some people, it's a little scary, but for me, I love it so much. I think it's such a great tool to have because it can really just give you that little bit edge over people, that little bit of that first step that you can get, and you could get so much information out of it. So I love it very much. But for the last question here, Alden, live on Lawyers in the Making podcast, what are your book recommendations for people? Doesn't have to be about the law, just some of your favorite books you've ever read in your entire life, something you give a gift to someone.
Yeah. So that's a hard one. So I always go with this, and this is funny because this is completely separate from law or self-help books or anything. But when I was like in third or second grade, I loved to read. It was all I did. And I wasn't allowed to read. My parents wouldn't let me read like these advanced adult books because they were like too gory or too violent or too sexual, whatever it may be. So the only books that kind of fit that need were the Harry Potter books. And I read the whole series 27 times between second grade and like fifth grade. So if I always recommend, like, it's just so well written, and I think there's a lot to learn from those books. Obviously, there are so many other books that you can read that are self-help books that are particularly useful to what you're trying to do. But I think there's something to be said for books that you can kind of get away from yourself and get away from your situation for a minute. And you can learn like valuable skills through, but you can also just be excited about and learn about and intrigued about. And I think it's kind of like an oasis away from someone who's starting their own business or who's a lawyer who's working all the time, to be able to take 20 minutes or half an hour in the morning or at night to read before going to bed. So that's what I would say.
Oh yeah, I mean, I actually, sad enough, I've never read any of the Harry Potter books. I don't know why. But now
I would recommend.
I might be buying the whole collection now, buy the whole series on Amazon. It'll be in my cart after we're done with this.
That's
But I love reading as well. I've always been reading my whole entire life. I used to have a bookshelf behind my bed. And so,
Mhm.
I hated actually going to sleep. So I just sit there and read. And I probably
In the
read
same way.
all of those books in my bookshelf. I've probably read them like 50 times over, especially those Bernstein Bears book. I'd be ripping through them. But just like that, the Harry Potter books. I love it very much. One of my favorite books as well, The Alchemist. Oh my goodness, I could talk about it all day long.
Yeah,
Paulo Coelho, I never know how to say his name, but
I think it's for a while. I think that's correct.
but spectacular book, and it's another one of those books where it's very simply written, and of course
Right.
that's the thing with Harry Potter. It's so well written. It's just a good read. Just makes
Right. That's
it's like
anything that's a good read that you can get away from. That's what I would recommend. For me, it's Harry Potter, and for someone else, it could be anything. Um, Another thought just did come to my head real quick. The Perks of Being a Wallflower is also another book, not a self-help book. And it is a pretty sad book at a lot of avenues, but I think it teaches a lot about strength and courage, and just being able to keep going regardless of your situation. I can't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but it was turned into a movie. It's a phenomenal read. And it's one of those things that just really, really motivates you.
Yeah,
So,
I've never heard of that book either. I'm getting all these books now. I always buy them. I always just go and I'm like, all right, I'll send it to my house and I'll see what happens.
yeah, you should.
As I always, sometimes it's hard to get the reading going, but I always say just read the good books. When you read the good books, it's so easy because
Right.
you're instantly in there. You can't get out of there. It's such an amazing thing. But third to last question here, Alden. What are the types of things you consume, not food, consume on a daily basis? Either that be through social media, so Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Reddit, any Substacks that you subscribe to, any podcasts that you listen to that you recommend to people. What is crossing the transom of Alden's mind on a daily basis?
Yeah. So I actually, like, I don't have the apps of like Instagram and Snapchat and things like that. I used to have them a lot and I go on them way too much. So now I've moved away from that. So I've subscribed instead to a bunch of these daily morning newsletters. As I've gone further along and I've realized I want to go more into private equity law and things along those lines, it's a lot of finance things, but the ones in my inbox currently that I every morning are let me find it. It's called the Daily Brew.
Of
And you can,
course.
yes. And then, so the Daily Brew and Brew Markets, they're a little bit different. One is more stock based and one is more merger based and acquisition based. And then I also have one that's very similar. I have to find it. The Short Squeeze, which is very similar as well and goes over some things that the Morning Brew does, but they tend to be a little bit more tailored to overall finance rather than those deals per se. So those, I just like to do a lot of research. And I think right now, if I'm going to be a lawyer in 4 years, which is the current plan, it's good to start learning about how the market works as well and how these deals work and kind of getting a solid base on the players in the market as we move forward. Because you can never be too well prepared and it only takes me half an hour in the morning.
Of course, I mean, I love myself some Daily Brew. My brother actually has Daily Brew sweatpants. I know they did a deal this is so many years ago too. This is like 2018. So
Yeah.
6 years ago. So I love myself some Alex Lieberman. He is the absolute GOAT. I always listen to his podcast whenever he's on one. He had one on My First Million one time, and I love that very much. That was one of my favorite episodes. Do you have any podcast recommendations as well?
I have a hard time when I listen to some podcasts because I tend to want to skip around too much. My brain just goes, and then I tend to want to look up what they're talking about and dive into it. However, I've been listening to this one lately. And it's these guys who they just talk about like the market and they talk about what's going on, and I just find it really interesting because they're very conversational about it. I can't find it. I listened to it a few days ago. I'll have to text you the link.
That's all right.
I
Listen.
can't remember what it's called.
It's totally fine. Listen, those were great consumption recommendations. I always love the Daily Brew Shout. And I always have to give my podcast recommendation. I always love My First Million. I know you'll like that one because just like it's very conversationalist, it's not very dry. It's very, upbeat. They keep it nice. And they're very interesting people on there.
Right.
People who obviously made their first millions, but some of the people on there are just absolutely ridiculous. My favorite guy, I'm forgetting his name right now, the creator of Overtime. He created Draw My Thing as well. That episode is absolutely amazing because that guy is just like culture vulture is like it's got a bad connotation, but this guy is just he's on the pulse. I mean, he made Overtime when he was like almost 50 years old. And
Yeah.
I would have never imagined a 50-year-old being the one to create Overtime and the marketing that they did.
Right.
And the fact that they had the Overtime t-shirts, it was almost 3 years that they kept those t-shirts private. They only sent them to people so they could build that hype. And then, they did millions, multi-millions dollars in revenue just
Right.
based on, everyone's doing we've all seen it. So that is such a spectacular episode and as well a great podcast. I love Sean Purry. I love Sam Parr. They're amazing people. But second to last question here. You got start LSAT. You're working at Morgan & Morgan. But Alden, what does an ideal Friday night and Sunday morning look for Alden?
Oh boy. My family and my girlfriend get mad at me all the time because I can't shut my brain off. It's just not possible. I don't know how people do it. I mean, I go to the gym every day. I'm like an avid lifter, which is pretty common for athletes that end up stop playing the sport. So I mean, last night I went to the gym and then I came home and I was able to watch the Eagles game with my girlfriend and kind of just unwind. And I think spending time with like those quality people when you have that time is really important. And it's something I'll be the first one to say I need to get better doing because I tend to get distracted and jump around. But I do think that's my ideal Friday night. It doesn't need to be out. It doesn't need to be with a lot of people. It just needs to be with the right people. And then a Sunday morning, ideal Sunday morning is getting up and going to Trader Joe's and just getting all the shopping out of the way. But then, I'm back in Philadelphia, which I love. I did not like the heat in Florida. I'll tell you that. I love the cold. So I love going for walks like in the cold when it's really cold out. But even now, like we'll go for a walk in the Wissahickon, which is a park basically of Philadelphia. And just things like that, going to the gym. I think moving your body is really, really important whenever you can get a chance, especially for someone who works 8 hours a day at Morgan & Morgan and then comes home and is in front of the computer working on his own company. So,
Yeah, I mean, listen, some people go to church for their time of prayer. I go to the gym because it's the best place in the world. I only started going to the gym very few years ago. It was only like 5 years ago when I first stepped in, but my God, I've been there every day since. So I cannot recommend more that people go to the gym because it is a magical place. And of course, isn't it fantastic looking this good? Of course it is. It's the greatest thing in the world. It makes you feel good. You look good, you feel good, you do good. That's what I think. But Alden, last question here, final question. I do this at the end of every single episode, but what are your words of wisdom for the aspiring law students, the current law students, the legal professionals, pretty much anyone out there, because you are a superstar, brilliant person. So what are those words of wisdom?
yeah, I think it's hard to sum it up into a few words, but I would say work hard even when the going gets tough, and especially when the going gets tough. Like keep working hard even when the light at the end of the tunnel isn't there, because it will pay off regardless. Like there's been many times in my life, many times in the past few weeks and months where, it just doesn't feel like we're getting enough sales, or I didn't see my LSAT score improving as much as I wanted to, or I just wasn't doing as well as I would like. And giving up, I realized it's not who I wanted to be in the path I wanted to take. So I worked even harder when I couldn't see the end than when I could, if that was even possible. So I think that's very important for everyone to do, regardless if they're studying for the LSAT in law school, or in the legal profession already.
I couldn't agree more, Alden. My father says it as well. He's told me my whole life, but when the tough gets going, the going gets tough.
Exactly.
Put your head down, get that work done. But Alden, that is the podcast. That is the episode. So thank you so much for coming on here.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, of course, spreading your wisdom, spreading your experiences. And for everyone out there listening, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check us out, lawyersinthemaking.substack.com, Lawyers in the Making, one word, substack.com. And I will see you all in the next one.